Good morning, everyone. Today we learn the essay Of Truth by Francis Bacon. Uh, when you read about Francis Bacon, you will read that he was born in 1561 in England and he died in 1626. And he was the Lord Chancellor of England. He was a lawyer, a statesman, a philosopher, and he was a master of the English language. And he is remembered in the literary world for the sharp worldly wisdom of the essays that he has written. He is rightly called the father of the English essay, and he was the first great English essayist who enjoyed a very glorious reputation. Because for the mass, he remains as a genius. His essays introduce a new form of composition into English literature. He wrote around 58 essays by 1625, and all the essays that he has written are results of his direct observations of men and matters. Uh, when you read Bacon's essays, you will understand that most of his essays, or almost all his essays, are charged with serious spirit and stately manners of Seneca. For him, his essays were dispersed meditations and they were actually a receptacle for detached thoughts. He is very practical, and utilitarianism is very much evident in most of his essays. He tells people how to lead successful life, and that is why we call his essays counsels, civil and moral, right? Bacon has borrowed the form of essay from Montaigne, the French essayist. He and Montaigne share the form of the essay, but not the spirit. Because Montaigne is very personal, very familiar, very prolific. But when you read Bacon's essays, you understand that he's a very formal person, very curt and very impersonal. So Montaigne appeals to the heart, but Bacon appeals to the head. So, both these great essays, Montaigne and Bacon, present a very sharp and very interesting contrast. When you go through Bacon's essays, we understand that his essays are capsules of impersonal wisdom. They do not give us immediate pleasure, but they give us lasting guidance, right? And this particular essay that has been prescribed for you, titled Of Truth, it gives expression to ideas which are very noble and which are worthy of highest appreciation. So, when we look around, we understand that the great thinkers of the world, the philosophers, the saints, the prophets, most of them have dwelt upon the supreme value of truth. And that is what Bacon also tries to do in this particular essay. And when we read this essay, we understand that this is written in a didactic tone. That means it's a kind of teaching, right? And the object of Bacon was to instill in the mind of his readers a love for truth, right? And he says in the essay that a man's mind should turn upon the poles of truth. And when we analyze the principal merit of this essay, we understand that it is the stylistic qualities of the essay that gives its glory, right? So the ideas of the essay about truth are already familiar to us, but the manner in which Bacon states them and the way in which Bacon conveys it to us is very, very important, right? He shows us his love of learning, and he also, shows us we understand the habit of introducing allusions. He gives us so many similes, very vivid metaphors to illustrate his ideas. And we understand that this particular essay very well shows Bacon's gift of compression, brevity, right? He always says brevity is the soul of wit. So most of the sentences in this essay are written in the very compact and very terse style of which Bacon is a master. So we have allusions, we have aphorisms, we have illustrations, quotations, which make the reading of this essay a very rich and entertaining experience. And the most striking merit is the condensation of thought. So I told you that Bacon has a very distinct style, right? His stylistic features, very, very important. So no man's style is more characteristic of his age than his, right? So Bacon's style is still unmatched after so many, I mean, almost 5 centuries. His simplicity, the strength, the brevity, the clearness, precision, all that is evident in his essays are something that is very particular to him. I mean, nobody has matched that. His essays are very simple, only in the sense of being free from all kinds of affections, from any kind of studied elegance in the choice of words, in the structure of sentences, and so on. So we would say that the strength of Bacon's style is very, very intellectual, right? Montaigne was very emotional, and Bacon does not give any space for, I would say, energetic display of feelings. He says what he has to say in a very vigorous and a very terse manner, right? So I would say that the strength of Bacon's the strength of Bacon's essay, the secret of his strength, it lies in the conciseness, the precise form that he has used. So when we look at the writers, ancient writers and modern writers, we don't find anyone who has succeeded in compressing so much meaning within so short a compass, right? So we can say that Bacon's essays are really marvels of condensation, and the secret of clearness of his style is the clearness of his thought. So that is just a brief introduction about Bacon. Now we come to this particular essay, and I'll just read it. And since it's in a little archaic language, so because it was written during the 17th century, so it will be the Middle English period, we can say. So the language that would be a little difficult or maybe archaic for us to understand. So I'll just go through each line, and maybe we'll just discuss what that is. So it starts like this: "What is truth?" said jesting Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. So here, Francis Bacon refers to Pontius Pilate. He was a person of influence in the Emperor Tiberius Caesar's court. And all of us, or most of us, know that he was involved in the persecution or maybe the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. He's the one who gave permission for that. So Pilate was not looked upon favorably by Christians. He still isn't, right? So he enjoyed a somewhat sullied reputation. And here, Bacon takes Pilate's name to express how humans in general avoid truth. Pilate knew the truth. He knew that Jesus was innocent, but he would not work on it. Right? Similarly, human beings avoid truth. They find truth inconvenient, they find it very difficult to imbibe. We'll continue. Certainly, there has to be that delight in giddiness and count it a bondage to fix a belief, affecting free will in thinking as well as in acting. What he means here is people do not seek truth and they enjoy resorting to falsehood and lies. People like ambiguity, they like inaccuracy because they can, I would say, couch the harshness of truth in convenient language. Continue. And though the sects of philosophers of that kind be gone, yet there remain certain discoursing bits which are of the same veins, though there be not so much blood in them as there was in the ancients. So, what Bacon means by this particular line is Bacon tells us, or he goes back to the ancient Greek philosophers who often lost their way while looking to ascertain what really truth was. Now, he laments the fact that some of these independent minded, free thinking philosophers proposed that there was nothing real as truth. But while trying to prove the contrary, they soon wavered and they came out with very conflicting decisions. So these type of thinkers have ceased to exist. The present ones, they lack the rigor or the nerve of the ancient great minds. So they are paler versions of their illustrious predecessors. But even they doubt the existence of truth and they tend to drift towards falsehood. So, you have both these, the ancients and the moderns. So some of these ancients also, they never gave importance to truth, right? Similarly, the moderns also, they follow what their predecessors have done. We continue. But it is not only the difficulty and labor which men take in finding out the truth, nor again that when it is found it imposeth upon men's thoughts, that doth bring lies in favor, but a natural though corrupt love of the lie itself. So, what he says here is people do make very sincere and strenuous attempts to discover truth. They succeed, but regrettably they find the burden and demands of truth to be unbearable. So they abandon the pursuit of truth and they drift towards lies, knowing very well that resorting to lies is degrading. The world of lies is dark, but somehow people develop a fascination for lies at the expense of truth, because they find that going after truth or standing for truth is not easy. You have to pay a cost. So it's easy for them to leave that burden or leave the demands of truth because they find it so difficult, and go in search of lies because it is easier. They know it's degrading, but in spite of that, they're not ready to pay the price, or they're not ready to take a cost, right? Or pay the cost. Continue. One of the later schools of the Grecians examineth the matter and is at stand to think what should be in it, that men should love lies, where neither they make for pleasure, as with poets, nor for advantage, as with the merchant, but for the lie's sake. So, some Greek philosophers of later periods delved into this matter. They tried to realize or understand what was it that attracted people towards lies. So, in poetry, some distortion of truth adds to a poem's literary beauty. You can call it maybe imagination or fiction, whatever. So, you need to make some kind of allowance to accommodate fantasy and fiction, because that would enhance the reader's literary pleasure. Even merchants and traders resort to a certain amount of falsehood because they want to entice the customers to buy their merchandise, right? But the question is, why do common people resort to lies? They know that it is wrong. They know that it has got unsavory consequences. But why is it that they resort to lies? So that is what the school of Greek philosophers tried to find out. We continue. But I cannot tell, this same truth is naked and open daylight, that doth not show the mass and mummeries and triumphs of the world half as stately and daintily as candle lights. So, what Bacon goes on to say is truth depicts everything. It depicts everything very, very honestly, very faithfully, very transparently. Truth is very transparent. So there is no place for extravagant praise or derision, right? Superficial description or even flattery, sycophancy in truth. So emperors, heroes, military commanders, and other men and women of prominence are described with minimum laudatory language. So truth builds no artificial aura of greatness around them. So, what happens when they're bereft of their unrealistic praise, they appear vastly diminished in stature, right? So he goes on to say that truth is very, very transparent. So when you describe great people without any sycophancy or without any flattery, there is no artificial aura of greatness around them. So they sometimes they don't appear to be great, they appear diminished in stature. Continue. Truth may perhaps come to the price of a pearl that showeth best by day, but it will not rise to the price of a diamond or carbuncle that showeth best in varied lights. So he says a pearl shines in the day. You can't see a pearl at night, right? A diamond glows at night. It gives an unreal feeling of light in the midst of total darkness, right? Truth is like a pearl. It shows what is visible to the naked eye. It can't show anything by lighting up something unrealistically, right? So only falsehood, according to Bacon, has the capacity to make something apparent in total darkness. We'll continue. A mixture of lie doth ever add pleasure. Doth any man doubt that if they were taken out of men's mind, vain opinions, flattering hopes, false valuations, imaginations as one would, and the like, but it would leave the minds of a number of men, poor shrunken things, full of melancholy and indisposition, and unpleasing to themselves. So Bacon goes on to say that a cocktail of lies and truth has got the power to please human beings. It has got more power than only lies and only truth. So Bacon, what is he paradoxically suggesting here? He suggests the utility of such combination of lies and truth. See, if everything is portrayed in their true colors without any addition of superficial praise, flattering comments, and allusions, this society would appear very drab. It would be very dull. So, sometimes you need vanity, you need exaggeration to induce creativity, energy, and intellectual activity. He says, suppose a poet is not felicitated or a player is not rewarded, how will they be motivated to reach higher levels of accomplishments? So, while showering praise, he says, use a certain amount of unreal description of one's feat that is needed. Otherwise, every kind of praise will become very bland and ineffective. One of the fathers in great severity called poesy vinum demonum, that is devil's wine, because it filleth the imagination, and yet it is but with the shadow of a lie. But it is not the lie that passeth through the mind, but the lie that sinketh and settleth in it, that doth the hurt, such as we speak of before. Right? So he says, some of the very respected men of great wisdom, they have denigrated poetry by saying that it contains lies. They desecrated poetry. They say poetry contains lies. They felt that the poet adds fiction, exaggerations, allusions to his poem to impart it some charm and attraction to the reader. So, what Bacon says is most of these lies actually may not stay permanently in the mind of the reader. However, a part of such falsehood does get embedded in the reader's mind, impairing the sense of the readers. And this could indeed be a sad consequence of reading poetry. We'll continue. But howsoever, these things are thus in men's depraved judgments and affections. Yet truth, which only doth judge itself, teacheth that the enquiry of truth, which is love making or wooing of it, the knowledge of truth, which is the presence of it, and the belief of truth, which is the enjoying of it, is the sovereign good of human nature. So, what he says is lies undoubtedly would desecrate the mind, it would deprave the mind. Truth, on the other hand, remains unblemished always. It is absolute, it does not have any kind of different interpretations, and the inquiry of truth is a romantic pursuit. It's just like love making or wooing, and it demands the indulgence of the pursuer. So, knowledge of truth means owning this unique gift. When one reposes absolute faith in truth, the feeling becomes very, very enjoyable. It symbolizes the ultimate good of human nature. We'll continue. The first creature of God, the works of the day, was the light of the sense. The last was the light of reason, and his Sabbath work ever since is the illumination of his spirit. First, he breathed light upon the face of the matter or chaos. Then he breathed light on the face of man, and still he breatheth and inspireth light into the face of his chosen. So, he has biblical allusions here, Bacon, and he says, when God created the world, he said, let there be light, right? He gave the light of sense to mankind. And using this, human beings could see, feel the world around them. Then God gave the power of reason. Using this, human beings could reason what was good, what was bad in the things happening around them, the things being said around them. So, as a result, human beings got the power of enlightenment. Then, after all this, God radiated light that illuminated the world, which was so much in chaos or disorderly till then. Then his light fell on human beings to make them superior in knowledge and wisdom to other species. And after this, he focused his kindly light on the face of those human beings whom he loved the best. So that's why he says, in the face of his chosen. So he takes, he gives us a chronological idea of how the creation took place, how God breathed his light upon the world and upon human beings. We'll continue. The poet that beautified the sect that was otherwise inferior to the rest, saith yet excellently well, it is a pleasure to stand upon the shore and to see ships tossed upon the sea. A pleasure to stand in the window of a castle and see the battle and adventures thereof below. But no pleasure is comparable to the standing upon vantage ground of truth. He says, a hill not to be commanded, and where the air is always clear and serene, and to see the errors and wanderings and mists and tempests in the vale below. So always that this prospect be with pity, and not always with swelling or pride. Certainly, it is heaven upon earth to have a man's mind move in charity, rest in providence, and turn upon the poles of truth. That's what he says. When one stands on a beach, you get to see, when you stand on a beach, you get to see ships being rocked violently by the winds. It becomes a very breathtaking experience. When you stand by the window of a high castle and look down, you can see the battle that is raging below. That's also a very unique experience. The same way, when a human being can realize truth, he can feel as if he's standing atop, on the top of a mountain, enjoying the beauty and bliss. By, what, according to Bacon, by attaining such an exalted status, man should not become proud. Instead, he should become humble, he should be benign, loving towards others, he should engage in charity. To pass from theological and philosophical truth to the truth of civil business, it will be acknowledged even by those that practice it not, that clear and round dealing is the honor of man's nature, and that mixture of falsehood is like alloy in a coin of gold and silver, which may make the metal work the better, but it embaseth it. For those winding and crooked courses are goings of the serpent, which goeth basely upon the belly and not upon the feet. There is no vice that doth so cover a man with shame as to be found false and perfidious. And therefore, Montaigne, as I said earlier, he always quotes from Montaigne. Therefore, Montaigne, the French essayist, saith prettily when he inquired the reason why the word of the lie should be such a disgrace and such an odious charge. Right? So, he says, philosophical truth belongs to a certain domain, right? Theological truth belongs to another domain. They belong to certain domains. But when we deal with our day to day mundane or dull matters or ordinary matters, one finds it very difficult to stick on to truth always. Because, if you need to make your business and dealing smoother, sometimes you need to mix lies with your dealings. I'm not saying it is right, but that is what usually people do. And this sometimes appears to be a very practical necessity. It's not justifying that, but there are people who do that because they find that it is practical and it is a necessity. So even when you do that and succeed and emerge a winner, you'll understand, or you'll always feel in your heart that what you've done is very dirty and it is very degrading. It is like adding an alloy where a foreign element is added in small quantities to a metal like gold and silver to give it more strength and toughness. We see that, no? We always talk about people adding copper to give gold its strength. Chemba, we say, no? Chemba kalatti to sorna undakum. Illa. So it is like adding that. So what happens? The purity of gold is definitely lost. Even though there's much more of gold and less of copper, but the purity is, it's constrained, or it is compromised with. So such alloying, it robs the silver and gold of its luster. It's like a snake, he says, that moves on its belly always and can never stand up erect and upright. This is why, he says, eminent men like Montaigne declared that falsehood or telling lies was universally degrading and loathsome. Right? So we come to the last line. He said, saith he, if it be well weighed, to say that a man lieth is as much to say that he is brave towards God and a coward towards men. For a lie faces God and shrinks from man. Surely the wickedness of falsehood and breach of faith cannot possibly be so highly expressed as in that it shall be the last peal to call the judgment of God upon the generations of men. It being foretold that when Christ cometh, he shall not find faith upon the earth. Right? So this is how he finishes or closes the essay. It's he uses a lot of Christian allusion. So he says, when you analyze this deeply, what Bacon says is, a person who lies is afraid of ordinary mortals and has the courage to face God, right? He is a very lowly soul. He doesn't have any wisdom nor any intellectual heft. So when the day of judgment comes, a person who has lied all his life cannot face God. He'll be punished for his guilt. Because it has been said that gradual erosion of moral values in the world will slowly drag the earth to a state where faith ceases to exist. So we need to understand that even today, human beings are always afraid of the created, not the creator. They're not afraid to lie to human beings. I mean, but they forget that uh, they are actually lying before the creator, right? And God sees that. God sees that. They might hide things from men, but they cannot hide things from God. And that is the kind of erosion that is happening to moral, ethical values in our society. And soon, Bacon says that faith will cease to exist, right? So, this is what this essay of truth is. I've just given you a basic, I would say, explanation of each line of what Bacon was trying to tell us. And I would go into the analysis of this particular essay in the next class. Right? Just now, we've just analyzed who Bacon was, what his essays were like, and we've also gone into a line by line discussion of this particular essay of truth. So, thank you very much. Do you have any doubts regarding this? If not, thank you very much.